of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. Since this is a planning commission meeting, first, we don't have the Director Harrington with us tonight.
I'm on virtually.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we'll cover are the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting for September 6th. Any commissioners have comments on that, or are we ready to move to a motion? Ready to move to a motion? So do I hear a motion?
That we accept the minutes and move on to the next agenda.
All right. Is there a second? John or Tracy?
A second.
Okay, so the motion is,
Yes, good morning, perfect.
can we mute the, Kelly, can we mute the online folks until they're ready to speak?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the Councilman Sampson made a motion to accept. It was seconded by Tracy. All in favor? John, are you in favor?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
I did not think she was going to be online. Commissioner Banks, are you online? Kelly, can you tell us if she is?
Mr. Chair, I do not see her online.
And Councilwoman Bryant Ward, yay or nay on the minutes? Yay. And I too, so they pass unanimous. Minutes are approved from the previous meeting. So as we wait for Jamie Kendrick, can we go out of order here and talk about the planning department report? Move to Director Harrington.
Yes, we absolutely can. Good evening, Planning Commission members and council members. So for the Planning Department updates, I know the council will be familiar with these since it was mostly what I presented at the monthly business meeting. Let me just pull this up here. So for monthly statistics, we had 2 new major site plan applications, 2 stormwater management applications, and 2 zoning confirmation letters. I did some development updates on Pine Grove, formerly Heritage Green, just noting their progress that we have issued their entrance sign permit and building permits are starting to be approved for Neighborhood K. The La Plata Parkway pavement from Charles Street has been installed up to close to where Neighborhood K is. It's not all the way in yet. Mass grading plans for parcel Q and A have been approved, and the commercial plans are under development for parcel P. We've seen a concept, but no official submissions at this point. Moving forward to planning department priorities, town code revisions are starting to become clearly evident that we need to move forward with these. So my number 1 priority is the adequate public facilities ordinance. I will be revising that draft and sending that back for legal review before proceeding with the Planning Commission. We're also still working through the Planning Commission rules and procedures, annexation procedures handbook, the Municity software implementation for our development review and permit system, working on a development capacity analysis, and working on our school seat allocation policy review in coordination with Charles County Government and the Board of Education. And so that's the updates that I have, unless anyone has any specific questions for me.
Mayor has a question.
I do. Director Harrington, how many permits did you say have been issued for Pine Grove or have been requested right now?
So I know that we had 12 the last time I had checked, and I think we received 4 more as of this morning.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments for Director Harrington? Not hearing any. How about a council report from Councilwoman Bryant Ward?
Good afternoon, Chairman Gann. Actually, I don't have a report for you. Basically, everything that's come before us has come before you. We did have a public hearing, last week, on Steeplechase Phase 3. Had two speakers to speak. They were very, I thought they did a great job of, sticking with the issues and not, attacking and being, I thought they did a great job, and subsequently followed up with one of the residents to talk about some things. And so we'll see how we move forward.
And the council approved
We
the
did.
plan.
We did approve, and we approved it without conditions.
Okay. So the only thing left on the agenda is our main topic, and we're waiting for Mr. Kendricks to arrive. But we do have two guests, Mr. Reimer and Counselor Greer, right? Yeah. So I guess we can just take a pause in the meeting until Mr. Kendricks arrives.
I can give you a bit of an update on transportation. We did meet with Deputy Secretary Powell in their annual tour, and La Plata was granted $11.4 million for improvements from 301 to Willow Street on Route 6. That will be part, and I'm sure that Jamie will probably cover it a little bit more, but that will be part for bike paths and moving that area forward. So a lot of good things are happening we also found out that we will be getting a stoplight at 488 and Radio Station Road. Construction should start in March and be finished before the school year begins of next year. Many were hoping for a roundabout there, but I think that this is the first step in doing something. And I know Delegate Patterson was very instrumental in moving that forward. So that's some good news on that one. And
If I may ask a question on that
Sure.
one, would that be a light that's functional all the time or only during in and out of school time?
I think it's going to be functional all the time, which could, it's going to be interesting since I live on the other side of that one. And we get backed up a little bit when school is
Oh, yeah.
in session. So maybe this will facilitate a better flow on there, but I know when my kids were going to the high school there, as soon as they got out of the subdivision, they were pretty much in traffic until they turned on the radio station, depending on how late they were getting to school. So that will be interesting to see how that works out. I think that's a first step. I'm hoping that it is very successful, but if not, there is always been a talk about having a roundabout there. And that might work. And then the other thing is that Jamie might mention it in here too, is that we did receive funding. Brent, I think it was $384,000 for Radio Station Road bike path to connect to Charles Street, and it's going to interconnect all the way down to 3 Notch. And they've been working on that. So it was a wonderful meeting with the deputy secretary, and we finally, I guess after years and years of being persistent, they actually awarded us some money. So that was a good day for us.
So Councilman Jenkins, you have a question?
Well, I just wanted, I guess I had a comment and observation about the 488 Radio Station Road light. I was somewhat surprised that all of a sudden they're going to put a light there. I mean, because I listened to that presentation and it was like, I could tell the room went aghast, which is when district engineer said that, it's like, and what concerns me about that, very frankly, is that, and I hope I'm out of turn, but I'm gonna say it anyway. They don't seem to really talk to us. They just kind of, oh, we're gonna do this, and by the way, you may not have any say in it. And again, and we can talk about later when Jamie gets here. And at one time, the roundabout there was in the county CIP.
Oh,
Because I talked to one of the planners at the county planning group management. I don't know if it's still in now, but so he told me it's been in and out. Jason Groff is who I
Yeah.
talked to. So it's been in and out, and so I don't know whether it's too late, but speaking for me, I would like us to talk to the state highway administration and see if that's possible. Because a roundabout is a much, I think it's a better design, it's a more pleasing design, and it's like a gateway into La Plata. The other issue is in the county's priority letter, they did mention, and I forget the exact language that was issued in April. There was some language about a signal or crossing or some study at the entrance to King's Grant, because we have that issue of pedestrian people crossing and going to the path that goes to Lake Tillman. Because I've ridden my bike through there on weekends, and it's frankly pretty hairy getting across there. And I did see people actually using that pathway. So I think it's been highlighted by State Highway, and I think Councilman Schwander may know more about than I do, but I just wanted to add those comments.
They did do a study within the last 3 years about that. They sat there all day long and found that there wasn't enough traffic on that day of people crossing. So they have not moved forward with that request of painting a crosswalk right there. And to me, that's a traffic calming method, once you put that up there and put a sign, but they did not think that it warranted that. So unfortunately, and I use it all the time, when you're crossing there, you just have to make sure that you make eye contact with anything coming either way. As they come over that, it's just a little hill coming westbound. It's just a little hill there that if someone's going quickly, that could be disastrous.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mudd is requesting the floor.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Mudd is requesting the floor.
Your meeting.
Commissioner Mudd, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks. Just a quickie. I noticed that Jason Groff is virtually connected tonight. I know Dave Jenkins mentioned his name earlier, so if he's available, obviously he could join in if that's appropriate. Didn't want to miss that opportunity for the board and the council.
And if I may, this is Director Harrington. We did invite the state and the county to participate in the meeting tonight. The state was not available to participate, but we have had a couple conversations with them. And yes, Ben Yeckley and Jason Groff are on the call. I told them that really Jamie was doing the presentation tonight, and that if they could be available for questions or providing responses, that would be great. So hopefully they can provide some input for you as well.
Okay, so I need some clarification. Who does Jamie work for?
Reed Hunt. He's our traffic consultant.
Yes, he's our
Or
traffic
the-
consultant, so he's technically working for the town.
Meek and Hunt.
Okay,
He's coming.
Mm-hmm.
he's running late, yeah.
Okay.
And I see Jason is on if you have any questions for him right now.
Jason Groff, he's
I
on.
didn't know it was on. Thank
Hi,
you.
Jason.
Oh, sorry.
It's
Hello.
man James. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me this evening.
Thank
Um,
you. Do you have anything to
course.
add from the meeting that we were at with Deputy Secretary Powell? I thought it was a very productive meeting.
It was indeed. And congratulations on the award of the $11+ million for bicycle and pedestrian improvements on Route 6. That's great. But just to, I guess, add on to what Councilmember Jenkins mentioned in terms of the roundabout, I do believe the project is still in our capital program. I was trying to look it up really quickly, but it's more or less, for lack of a better description, a legacy project. It's been around a while. And the challenge that we found in doing the project was we had originally planned a signal at that location, and with some possible relocation of the intersection itself to give some more space and capacity at that location, because as you know, as I'm sure you're familiar with, it's a tight turn where radio station ties into 488. And the state has some jurisdiction here, mainly because 488 is a state road. Anything with a number is a state road. Short end of the story is basically that the project exceeded our budget when the state told us that they would like a roundabout at that location. So I kind of chuckle at the state has agreed to put in the traffic signal, because originally we had envisioned a traffic signal at that location, but the staff at the time said that they only wanted to see a roundabout at that location. A roundabout is considerably more expensive than a traffic signal because it's very land consumptive. It's a lot more construction and material and that sort of thing. You introduce stormwater management and so on and so forth. So just to sort of round out the conversation, it's great that they're proposing some traffic control there in the form of a signal at this point. We can certainly continue to work with the town if you wish to pursue a roundabout at that location. I will say that one of the adjacent property owners went through the process of being granted a special exception from our Board of Appeals to be able to have a cemetery at the property that's sort of the wedge between 488 and Radio Station Road. To my knowledge, I don't believe that that use has been initiated, but they do have approval for that use, and it's still an active approval as of right now. So that the point in that is that should there be any activity there, that makes it more complicated, and it also makes it more expensive to purchase the property because the use is more than just sort of an inactive property. So anyway, that's the sort of the summary of where things are with that intersection.
Jason, I have a quick question for you. That property that, to my knowledge, the previous owner had the exception for the cemetery. And then I believe the owner of the Charles Surrey went and bought that. Does that, because the exception was with the previous owner, does that move forward with the new owner as well?
I believe it runs with the land. I'm certainly not as familiar with the zoning indenture, or not the zoning indenture, the documents that codified that use approval. I know that that use approval had sort of a time limit on it. They did come in for a renewal of it several years ago, and I believe that time is still active. However, if someone else purchased it and they aren't, if for some reason they're not interested in continuing that use, it will ultimately expire, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
That piece of property is in the county, correct? Not
It
the
is.
county.
It has not been
Yes.
annexed in yet.
Yes.
Councilwoman Brian Ward.
Thank you, Chairman Gann. Director Harrington, I thought for some reason that Pine Grove had roundabouts in their preliminary plat plans.
They do have one roundabout that I'm aware of off the top of my head in the center of the property. That will be where the actual 110 acre park is located.
Okay.
If that's still on the, I don't think I have that on that tracking sheet.
I thought it was more than one for some reason.
Can pull it up. Let me pull up the plan.
Is it your turn? It is your turn. You can. There's no rest for the weary. Come on.
I apologize.
No problem.
The whole thing's traffic.
We understand. All things. So
Councilwoman
welcome
Evelyn
aboard.
Bryan, she is correct about the roundabouts. There are a couple that are proposed throughout the development.
2,
Two from what I see on the master site development plan.
that's what I recall.
Thank you.
So we're at that point on the agenda where we're going to have a transportation update by Jamie Kendrick, Mead and Hunt. Welcome aboard, sir. Do you need a respite first, or are you just ready to go?
No, I've held you long enough. Appreciate being here. And I cannot see who's online. I believe there are some
Commissioner Mudd is online.
other transportation colleagues. Anybody from the county or state?
Jason Roth from the county.
Jamie, I got an email from Michelle Verkis stating that no one from MDOT would be available tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. We've been very pleased to be your traffic engineer, transportation planner for the past couple of years now. And we've been working on a number of specific projects that staff thought was important that we update you on, but as we've been doing those projects, thought it was also important to talk through some issues that are recurring and policy directions you all might want to think about going forward. So I'm just going to dive in, and what I've tried to do is, there we go. I think Kelly's actually in this magnitude, is to do this in the context of the comp plan. I mean, I could go on for days about issues generally, but these were the 4 things in the comp plan that you said were important to you. 5, 4.5 really are transportation. Walkability, supporting growth with adequate public facilities, strategic proactive connections to support community development. This was a lot about the town center project, regionally significant transportation investments, and managing the supply of parking and a little bit of new off-street parking. So we're going to focus on 3 of those this evening. And the way I've planned this is about maybe 5 minutes, 7 minutes for me on each topic, and see if any of the county or state representatives wish to comment, and then obviously an open discussion as we go from there. So let's see. So goal 16 is about walkability. Continue to make walkable, LaPlata a very walkable community. Raises, and what I'm going to do is give a status report on kind of each element of the comp plan as we go. Washington Avenue, St. Mary's Avenue, Kent and Oak Streets for sidewalk projects. And I do know that the county has about 75,000 or so in its capital program to be initiating a feasibility study on Washington Avenue sidewalks. I've got a slide about that in a minute or so. There is pedestrian crossing issues across 301. You see what we call goat paths along, and then see the people running across to get there. That I think is frankly an incredibly tricky issue to deal with, and I'm not sure that there's a good practical solution at the end of the day, but it's something we should always be striving for. There's some issues along Maryland 6 that are going to get talked about in a moment. Then more sidewalk and other projects. So let's just go into some of these. The first is the major investment we're all making, which is in the side path for out to Laurel Spring Regional Park. As you recall, you've got a grant from MDOT last year in the amount of $330,000 that you all matched with another 100 and change to move this project forward. We are in the design process for that. We have, like many other firms, hit some snags with sub-consultants along the way. Getting smaller firms out there to do GeoCheck right away has been difficult, but we finally have gotten those hurdles overcome. So I'd say we're about a month behind schedule, but making it up in other ways. We are aiming to have a 60% design submittal to the town and county and SHA by plus or minus the 1st of November. Gearing up for a final submittal and grant application for construction by the May to June deadline. We haven't set it yet for next year. It's typically somewhere between the 15th of May and Memorial Day. We are on target to meet that submittal. We think in total, the price has come down a little bit. We got a design waiver from the state to allow us to use the existing path along Agricultura rather than widening what is otherwise a fairly functional path there. And then a couple of other elements that didn't need to be as intense as we initially had planned out. So we think that cost has come down a little bit. Maybe given supply prices, it may end up being the same as we initially forecasted, but we're on target. And then you all need to make a decision about whether you want to go for the PennDOT Bikeways grant, which is up to 80% typically of using state funds, which is a much less cumbersome process, or go for a federal transportation alternatives program grant, which is also controlled by the state, which is typically a 50-50 match and often used for slightly larger projects. This one, it's a toss-up in my mind about what to do, unless time is your consideration, because federal funds just take painfully longer to spend. And so we'll probably want to revisit that issue with you, in the late winter, early spring. But we're on target to be able to apply for either of those programs come the deadline next year. Charles Street flashing beacons, I know my favorite topic of the mayor. MDOT is not here, or SCJ is not here, so maybe I can speak more freely. We wrestled this project to the ground about, a year and a half ago, Mayor? And SHA was going to design and construct flashing beacons at a point to be determined at time. The town in its wisdom said, you know what, we will give you the design and you build it. And so we submitted the final design package in, I want to say it was July or August, to them. They came back and said, well, we want to adjust this right of way. We want to adjust this box. Mind you, when we're talking right of way adjustments, we're talking about things no larger than the size of this podium. So that cost us a couple of months, and actually the theater is off the hook in terms of its donations right away. The state also wanted the property owners who were donating their property to provide a certificate of an attorney's letter saying that the title was free and clear. And I said, let me get this right. You're asking, small businesses who are giving you this property to spend, $800 to $1,000 to give you we're not going to do that. It's cost us a couple of weeks, but we think that's moving ahead. So we do think at this point, spring of 2023 is a reasonable deadline, and probably will encourage you all to encourage others to approve that along the way. But if they have the excuse of we don't have it ready yet, is no longer available. Washington Avenue sidewalks. I mentioned this a minute ago. I know that Frank has been in conversations with county planning staff that the county would like to see a partnership. This is their road by and large. It is your town, and the twain shall meet in order to get this done. I think the biggest challenge here is going to be right of way. So south of Hawthorne, there's a 30-foot right of way. So you see the poles right up against the road. In some cases, a little slow retaining walls. So we're gonna have to figure. That's going to be the hardest piece to figure out, is how we do this without impacting. We're going to impact private property if we want to do this. That's just how we do it in the most, the least impactful way. So we provided, and then once you get north of Hawthorne, it goes to 50 feet, and you have a couple of little stream and drainage issues, but those are, less painful, I think, than the south end. So we provided a scope to the town county today, and I think they're going to do that over the next couple of weeks. And if they're so inclined, to get that started by the first of the year. That's that. But I think, and not to speak for the county, but they do really see this as a partnership. It will become, relatively speaking, expensive projects, set aside who pays for it. There will be process things that need to get moved through, like right of way, et cetera, that you just need to get moved through the process. And who can handle that better, more timely, et cetera, will become the bigger issues. Okay, so that's walkability, and we want to pause there and talk about other walkability kind of priorities. Actually, if Jason or somebody else from the county is on the line and wants to say anything, I don't think the commission would mind.
Good evening again, council members and the planning commission. My name is Jason Groth. I'm the deputy director for Charles County Planning and Growth Management. Just a couple of quick comments. Jamie's presentation is on the money in terms of the active projects and projects that we can partner with you guys on. Essentially, the challenges, especially for the one on the screen, Washington Avenue, are laid out pretty well. The limited right of way, the utilities, private property acquisition, stormwater management, all of those are uphill challenges, but one that I think we can look forward to, I guess, overcoming. In essence, what we need to figure out is where a hiker biker facility or sidewalks are most appropriate, and essentially kicking off such a capital project in the form of a feasibility study is probably the first step. We do have some funding there, as you can see. We welcome any additional funding from our partners to be able to accomplish the goal. But essentially, we need to determine what the design would be. Is it going to be a facility on both sides, one side? Is it going to be a sidewalk? Is it going to be a shared use path? And what comes with it in terms of making that happen. In essence, the character of Washington Avenue does change through the corridor, as mentioned, not just in right of way, but also in the type of development and the character of the surrounding area. We have newer development to the north, at least north of, once you get in the vicinity of Shining Willow Way on north, the properties or the homes are set further back off the roads. So you have a little bit more area to work with, and the utilities are a little less challenging. And new development is coming. So as that occurs, where we are, as the county and the owner of the road, we're trying to work with those projects to set down the footprint for what could ultimately be built there. So that's sort of the basic gist. We are happy to provide any feedback that you're looking for. But in essence, I think your presentation hit all the key points.
Commissioner Sampson, you had a question?
Yes, I was just wondering, and I know this is a ways down the road, but do the private owners along Washington Avenue have any ability or recourse to stay any action that impacts their property?
So when it comes to property acquisition, at least in terms of how the county administers property acquisition, we always approach the property owners from the earlier stages. Once we have somewhat of a design formulated, we try to negotiate a purchase of the property in terms of what's needed. We try to remain flexible. We rarely use eminent domain and condemnation of the property because it's much more workable for the county and the property owner to work together. In many cases, we've made adjustments to the design to make it more accommodating. But if your question is, can a single property owner, let's say, I don't know if stopping the project is what you mean, but essentially the best way to do projects like this is, once you have a design, is to do a lot of public outreach, educate the public on what you're planning on doing, and take their feedback, take what their concerns are back, because there may be some things that we're not aware of that they can give us in terms of information. Also, in many cases, we'll look at multiple alternatives, and whichever alternative makes the most sense to accomplish the goal of the project and meet the needs of the public could be the outcome.
Is an easement one of those options? You didn't mention easement. Where the property owner still owns the property, but gives right to the,
Yes,
Robert?
that is absolutely possible. We have areas where sidewalks are in easements. I think it depends on the circumstance and what fits the bill the best. In many cases, having a sidewalk on private property can become complicated in terms of liabilities and that sort of thing. So in many cases, the property owner wants the local jurisdiction to own that area. However, if it infringes on their enjoyment of the property in some way, certainly an easement is something we could consider.
So just so I'm clear, the property owner does not have the ability to stay in action on their private property, but can ask for an accommodation. Is that the bottom line of it?
At the very,
Uh,
not to put the county, but at the very end of the day, right? If the authority having jurisdiction, in this case, largely the county, desires to use its eminent domain authority, it can. But that's a delegate decision. And I think, you want to go 99.8% of the way in accommodation before you get to that point.
right,
That's correct.
Chairman Gay.
Madam
Hi.
Mayor.
Jason, we have in our possession the authority, I guess, or authorization is a better word, to put sidewalks in. It was many years ago. All of the people on, I think it was the east side, had signed off on it. And I'm sure you probably know this because you've been around for a while too. And this is one of my issues that I'm very passionate about. They had all signed off and somehow there was a discrepancy on the cost to implement and lay down the sidewalks. So the town vacated that project, much to my chagrin, but this was many, many, many years ago. Is that not, I know with the library going in, there's obviously going to have to be a sidewalk in front of the library and it's not going to be a sidewalk to nowhere. Is it worth looking at resurrecting the interest of those that had signed off? Because many of them are still the same residents of, oh gosh, it was probably in 2000, 2005 that happened. Have you all even, do you have that in your possession or are we only the keepers of the keys on that one?
Well, because there are other departments that actually were involved in the project, it may be that, let's say, our Public Works Department was the keeper of those pieces of information. I'm not as familiar with them, quite honestly. But anytime you sort of start fresh, anything you have from the past that can be usable in terms of starting the conversation, certainly we can, always try to stir those things up. I will say though that the only thing people are bound by were purchased right of way or purchased easements. And sometimes people have a change of heart. Hopefully they don't. But anything we can do to get the conversation going, that's great. So any pieces of information the town has to help the project along when we get started would be great.
And I think community outreach is going to be very important on this project, but they're
Oh,
wanting
absolutely.
it because people are already walking in their yards. So this is a really important, important step in making our town walkable. Thank you for your work on that. I appreciate it.
Mr. Kendrick, before you move on, could I back you up to the Washington Avenue sidewalk?
Yeah.
If I understood you correctly, I heard you say that, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the one. I want to back you up further. Sorry, to the radio station road side path. I think I heard you say that the MDOT Bikeways grant, the town needs to make a decision on that. Is that the town council? And can you help me understand more about that?
The town, I'll say the town mothers and fathers. Staff, council, planning commission, whomever, I think all of you. It's really a question of, how much I mean, let's say we're talking about on the outside a $1.5 million project. If you go the transportation alternatives program route, you're talking about 750 state, I mean, so 750 town, 750 state/federal. But you're also sacrificing a lot of time. Those projects, even if you walk in with a shovel-ready project, the use of federal funds adds a mountain of paperwork and a year-ready project. So that's, the consideration. If it's a Maryland Bikeways program, because federal funds are not involved, and you all are administering the project under your own rules, things will move much quicker. If that's an 80-20 project, then how we do math, we're probably looking at 1.2 million in state bikeways money and 400,000, whatever, 300,000 in town funds. Obviously, that would be a far better situation, but the risk on there is that you're probably less likely to get $1.2 million. So the answer probably lies somewhere in between. It may be that you say, we're going to do a 50% match, but we want bikeways money because we don't want to touch the tapped federal money. But we already short circuited that process once when you all had us do the initial feasibility study in order to get in line more quickly, and let us get another 2.5 months into it, and we'll come and I will have some conversation with MDOT staff as well, and we'll see where we go.
Thank you.
Did I explain that clearly? I saw.
Chair McGann, I have a question. Director Harrington, I thought that we actually received funding for the bike path.
We did. You received the 328 for the design phase.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We did. Yep.
And we
Yeah.
didn't do anything to go to seek funding to complete the.
Yeah, so we knew that it would take about a year to get into the construction applications. That's where we will be come May.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may, I think our idea was to design during one cycle and then go out after we have the design to sort of seek the grant money, if you will, at the second phase, which is sort of traditional.
Councilman Jenkins?
Thank you, Chairman again. Just while we're on the subject, I noticed on the radio station road side path that there are two pedestrian crossings. One is at Box Elder, which leads into Lake Tillman, and the other one, I guess, is in front of the schools or Board of Ed. Or
And
maybe,
we're working on what that northern one is.
Okay.
And
my question is, because this is a county owned and maintained, would they participate in the construction or payment of that crossing? I guess I have to ask Jason, I guess, right?
I think that needs to be part of a conversation with
Okay.
the county.
My recommendation for that would be that the town write a letter to the county commissioners, because any budget decision is a county commissioner decision. And if you're requesting funds to support a project like that, that you would essentially write a letter asking for such.
Okay. And then just a follow-up question on the Charles Street flashing beacons. Who's paying for that?
So you all paid for the design work.
Okay.
40,000.
For both of them?
Or, yeah, right away work.
Okay,
And then the state is constructing them at their cost,
okay,
which is probably 75 to 90,000.
thank you.
All right, anything else on walkability issues or priorities?
A question.
Good, ma'am.
So you mentioned that there was a path at Agricopia. So is that at the radio station entrance, or is that the entrance closer to 488?
So there's an existing path at, if you're heading north at the first entrance.
Which is radio station, well, depending on which way you're
One
coming.
radio station.
Okay,
Okay, the first entrance is at Agricopia Drive, never fall. There's a path from there all the way up to the high school property on your left. It's about a 8-foot path, six or 8 foot path that's
Okay.
existing.
mm-hmm,
So we would extend that along the high school, up to, past the Board of Ed and then to Laurel Springs Regional Park. Where we cross over is still the subject for some discussion in the context of the Pine Ridge Connector Road, in the context of the county's, future plans, what the school board wants, et cetera. So we're working through that Northern Crossing now. And then at radio station, excuse me, at 488, it kind of comes in front of the assisted living facility and through there, kind of wind up the hill a little bit.
Okay, so I have two other questions. So the path that you're saying that's going to go in the direction of education, I think we touched on that, on this. Is there going to be a path to cross over to the park to, is it Tillman Park or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tillman Lake and.
Tillman Lake, yes, so there's,
There
okay,
would be a crossing and again up at somewhere in the vicinity just north of high school, park.
okay. And so the last question, is the path going to be multi-use? Is it going to be for bikes or?
Tend to be a shared use path all the way from, Bay Langdon up
Okay.
to.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I could ask a couple of questions. So it seems like, so Councilman Matt Challenger, Ward 2. So it seems like we've got some pieces of an overall comprehensive plan, obviously, to make it more walkable in town. I have a hard time divorcing the plan in general and collecting all these pieces and having a stoplight there on 488 at Radio Station Road that seems to create more traffic in this area, and then not having a plan at basically at the entrance and exit of Kings Grant over to the park. Is there not a way that we can tie this all together and work together with the county and come back to the state and say, look, we've got all of these pieces working kind of independently. Let's tie it together, because I don't know if you have any thoughts on the traffic light that we were talking about before we got here at Radio Station Road. But it just does not seem, I get what you're saying, Mr. Groth, about it being more expensive, but just long-term and overall use of this area, it seems to make a lot more sense as a roundabout, right?
Well, it depends. It depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to facilitate a smoother traffic flow and not have that vehicle backup, like you said, then certainly a roundabout is a feasible alternative. If you're talking about introducing a lot more bicycle and pedestrian traffic along the shared use path, crossing one of those roads is going to become more difficult with a roundabout. While people do slow down, they don't stop like they do at a traffic light. So be careful in your ultimate planning as to what just focus on what your goals are, and is what I would recommend. Now, certainly we can have a more coordinated approach in terms of county, state, and town on multiple intersections and pedestrian crossings, but just keep in mind that with a roundabout, people do not stop. So your crossing is going to have to be in a strategic location where drivers can very easily see the crossing, and you're probably going to have more of those RFBs, those rapidly flashing beacons that were mentioned earlier, where they're push actuated and they strobe so that cars can see them. We've had to install them on several county roads because we've had some pedestrians hit or even killed. So just have to throw that out there.
So we've laid this out at this point to be sufficiently wide, of anything that would occur at 488 and Radio Station. So if for whatever reason a roundabout is ultimately decided upon, although that's not the prevailing wisdom at this point from the county and state, then we're clear of that to the west. So do I have personal views on roundabouts versus signals? Yes. Not going to offer too much about that this evening, other than saying I'm a fan of roundabouts. I think it's a more elegant solution, but it's a lot trickier to pull off. Let's pull it down.
Councilman Jenkins?
I'd like to offer an observation, and my observation only. and a question. Roundabouts come in different varieties and species and forms. And with respect, from my perspective, I think there's another way to design a roundabout. Because again, with respect, state highway is car centric. Okay, that's what they do. But we've built and designed roads for speed and not safety. And so I can show you, and I will show Jamie, he already knows that. I'm not gonna, he already knows that. There are other examples where you don't have to design the Taj Mahal for a roundabout and accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists and safety. There are other ways to do this. And so again, my perspective, I would hope that we would pursue that. Then just this, again, this car-centric thinking about designing stuff. Because I agree completely with Councilman Trollinger. If we're going to have a comprehensive plan for a walkable La Plata, from my perspective, we need to get away from this car-centric mindset that all design is based upon speed to get X amount of cars through a road section. That is not the way of the world anymore. It isn't. And that's my opinion, but I can show you documents also will prove that. So I would just hope that we would begin to look at other options, and let's not over design a roundabout.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Mr. Vaughn, if I understand correctly, is referring to is by having the signal, you create more gaps upstream for people to cross over, whether it's at Bob Tower or wherever. Again, we've set up the design for the path to accommodate either alternative. And we've actually set up the path, and more broadly speaking, to respect the ultimate kind of boulevard approach that the county has set aside right away for along radio station before the game. So that if that were to occur one day, then, we would not have to rebuild path.
If I could just last thing on this. So just what we're talking about seems like the right time. I know Madam Mayor said that there was a study a couple of years ago about that crossing from Kings Grant to the park across 488. Given if there's a light up the road at Radio Station, like you said, that'll create a break in traffic, at least one way. Up the road will be a little bit lighter, but is this not the right time to address this again? I mean, can we not go back, since we're doing all this stuff right now, saying, look, I mean, I don't know what day they went out there, but on Saturdays and Sundays, it's constant. And it's not as much a traffic calming issue, but it's a pedestrian safety and potential death issue at that moment because of that hill and because of the overall speed on 488 coming down. There's no way to anticipate some of this stuff as a pedestrian from that spot.
So we're going to talk in a few minutes about Maryland 6 and the money the state has put aside in quotes for, future something Maryland 6. And one of the suggestions that I will make at that point is to say, that the limits that they have defined are pretty small, the Willow Lane to the 301. And I think and they've assigned a rather large sum of money for that, one less than a mile, maybe a mile stretch. I think there ought to be a fuller look from 48 and 6 all the way in, some of which we're accomplishing with the side map. Because I think there are speed management issues, safety issues in that entire segment. And it may be that some of that money is better spent on a better solution at 48 and Radio Station. That's my view. I've spent about 20 minutes thinking. So, but part of what we'll talk about, I guess maybe we're kind of clear now, if I may just kind of move on, is as I indicated, and as the county knows, MDOT identified in its capital program for the next 6 years that they would begin a process of rethinking Charles Street between Willow Lane and 301. Excuse me. What that looks like is anybody's guess at this point. Because I think the only message I wanted to convey tonight, our recommendation is that you all need to define the success of that project before another party does. Right? So what does it mean to be investing $10 million in Maryland 6? I have no reason to think anything other than the state highway would spend a lot of time with you all working through those issues. But I also know that once they get rolling, they tend to take on their own lives. And so my encouragement would be, the state's going to take a long time to get there anyway, but ask that, let's start a conversation about what the scope of the project really is and what you're looking to achieve when you made that initial request, and have them design towards that.
So this is Commissioner Gann. So do I understand that we're talking about the money, but we don't have a concept of what it will look like yet?
That's, I think, generally correct. So what somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, in 2004, the town did a master streetscape concept plan. I know that the SHA has been doing some analysis. I don't know the extent of that analysis. And I think at the end of the day, what they did is they just kind of picked a number and said, when we're planning a quarter like this, we say X number of miles times Y dollars, and that's what we're going to put in the budget because we have no idea what we're going to do. And then when I was deputy director at Baltimore DOT, we did the same thing. Somebody said Reisterstown Road from Northern Parkway to the city line is going to be a priority. We said, okay, we spent about $10 million on these projects in other parts of the city. That's our plug number. And then frankly, we started designing without really going back and doing that first step. I'm sure SHA will do that first step of purpose and need and scope with you all, but I just would again encourage you all to help them to define success sooner rather than later.
Councilman Jenkins.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Dave Jenkins, Ward 4. Just to follow on that comment, would it be appropriate for us to initiate quarterly, whatever meetings with the district engineer to talk about these and other issues on a quarterly basis?
So.
Or something to that
Jason-
effect?
Jason can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the county does quarterlies with SHA, some combination probably of Public Works, PGM, and a couple of others, and it may behoove you all to be at that table. Jason, does that still occur? I know in other counties it does.
Yes, so we meet with them on a regular basis. I can't recall if it's monthly or quarterly at this point, but regardless, I think the town has enough interest going with MDOT that it would be very beneficial for you to have a regular meeting. I don't know that you want to mix until there's joint projects. I mean, such as one of the ones earlier mentioned, like sidewalks on Washington Avenue. I don't know that you want to mix your topics with ours, but that's completely up to you all. I mean, you all are always welcome to attend our meetings with them. I will tell you that we frequently cancel them because we don't have as many current ongoing projects with them, but I would encourage you to meet with them early and often, as Mr. Kendrick is recommending.
Maybe the town can fill that void on your quarterly.
There you go.
Chairman
Thank
Gann.
you.
Chairman Gann,
So I
Director
need to-
Harrington has requested the floor.
Okay, that's what I was going to
Okay.
ask is for Director Harrington to weigh in on this conversation.
Okay. Director
Yes,
Harrington?
Good evening again. So I wanted to step in and say that the town did meet with SHA and their consultant who's doing the Charles Street review. So the town manager and myself did walk the entire length of Charles Street from 301 down to Willow Lane to kind of talk about the issues that we have, the pedestrian crossings, certain intersections that are causing problems. So we did do that whole trip with them to kind of point out what we thought needed to be addressed. They also sent us a worksheet that we completed to kind of reevaluate those concerns a little bit. And I don't know that we've received any responses from them at this point regarding the status or what they're, where they're at this point. But we did have an active role in that review and providing input.
Did you have anything to add, Councilman Bryant Ward?
So I did want to ask Director Harrington, given the feedback from Councilman Trolinger and Jenkins, to read, to look at, I think he said 2004, the streetscapes plan was put in place. Here we are, 2022. Certainly things would have changed, and will we be revisiting those streetscape plans that we have? Because I'm not confident that they will match what our population looks like right now.
Yeah, we did take a look at the previous streetscape plan. It's most likely not going to work the way that we had done it before. So I think that for the immediate future, there are a few intersections that need the most attention, not only for pedestrian safety, but for vehicular safety. I know that there was an accident on Charles Street this afternoon, so it's something that we need to start paying attention to and kind of calming some of those travel movements on and off the right of way. But I don't know if the previous streetscape is really feasible at this point in what we're looking to do.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mudd has requested the floor.
Mr. Mudd, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting presentation so far. I have to agree and stress from my perspective what I've heard, and that the town really does need to embrace State Highway on a regular basis. The meeting Janine had with them when they walked Charles Street is a great start, but it's something that should be routine. There's too many issues confronting the town that require town and state coordination. And to name probably one of the larger, it's Pine Grove, also known as Heritage Green. The entrance on Charles Street is going to be a key impact to the town, and the sooner we can work with State Highway on that issue, the better off we'll be. Not only will that entrance affect that location and Willow Lane, but it's going to have impacts all the way up and down Charles Street from 488 to Route 301. So the sooner we can get a handle on what that's going to mean with State Highway's assistance, I think we'll be better off and be better prepared to keep these projects moving, to meet their deadlines, but at the same time ensure that the traffic infrastructure, entrances, and improvements are on schedule to be provided when necessary. So again, my point is to encourage the town to routinely and regularly meet with State Highway. At Charles County, I know that's worked in the past. When I was with the county, our routine meetings with them were very beneficial, and not necessarily from the upper end, political end, but the day-to-day engineers with State Highway, the entrance experts, the local engineers. The day-to-day relationship is as important as any for us to make progress. So again, I just wanted to reiterate that as a positive step that I think we can take as we confront these various traffic issues.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Kendricks.
All right, so actually that's kind of a good segue between Charles Street and the next topic. When you think about Charles Street, you have to think about it in context, right? It really is, other than Rosebrook Road, right, the only way to get across town. Right? There's, I guess at the bottom end, you have Glen Albin that, serves folks down there, but that's not really where the traffic is. So as things like Pine Ridge occur, making sure that connection across the railroad tracks is, a priority to someone, is important. Thinking about the other, making sure that, Radio Station Road, 48 Radio Station Road is a viable north-south path, is important, right? Because right now, everything is geared, if all the development will occur with Pine Ridge and everything else over the next, let's say 5 or 7 years, you're just dumping a lot of traffic onto Maryland 6. You need to have other ways to get to the north-south arterials. And so it becomes easier to make a case for Maryland 6 being a much more kind of traffic calm, neighborhood main street if there are viable alternate paths. But right now, Maryland 6 is, basically the only way across town. And so that's, as we think about having that conversation with SHA about six, you gotta think about the other pieces too, because at the end of the day, you're right, that they do have to think about their, for better or worse, primary customer being the 22,000 or so cars a day that are on. Okay, so kind of moving on then, the third topic, and probably the one that requires the most conversation at the kind of policy level at this point, has to do with traffic impact studies, adequate public facilities, and how that process all plays out. So, and this was expressed, probably could have been expressed a little bit better in the general plan. It's a note of plan mark at that point. That, growth, both in terms of annexation as well as, major growth projects in the town really need to be supported by adequate public facilities. Was that me? Is that me? Yes, ma'am. Oh, it was you. I thought it was Councilman Jenkins again. So, we've been working with Janine, and with county staff and even state staff on many of these traffic impact studies for the projects that have been coming through over the course of the past 2 years now, whether Stagecoach, Steeplechase, Pine Ridge, Montero, Southdown Center, you name it. They're coming fast and furious. It's great. We kind of anticipated that in the comp plan. And so the question is how we manage all of that. And the problem is, there's a few problems. One is that you've got these overlapping developments and phased developments, which by themselves, as individual phases or small projects, don't really rise to the threshold of requiring traffic mitigation in the conventional sense and in the way that the rules are structured today. Right. So, and when we talk about this, I'm not picking on any particular development, but let's take Steeplechase. What's happened 3 or 4 phases now. You're now looking at, a phase that's 189 units somewhere. And just a matter of, it's neither here nor there, right? It's been allowed, it has accumulated over time, right? And as have several other jurisdictions, and the town doesn't have a great mechanism to, to find creative ways to address phasing or the cumulative impacts of development. And so we'll talk about the southwest side in a minute. Without going into any great detail, you get 1,600 or so units, including those which have already been built, and frankly, all the traffic which exists coming from Virginia to, Prince George's County and everywhere else in between. So it's really difficult and this is common everywhere, and some jurisdictions are finally picking up on it. It's really difficult to find traffic mitigation strategies for developments that are 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 units, right? Even up to 200 units, it becomes really difficult unless there's a really acute issue. First of all, let's say you had a traffic signal you wanted to be built. Well, putting in a 20 or 30 unit development, it's hard to say that the 50 or 60 trips generated by that development ought to trigger a $100,000 expense by a developer to build a traffic signal, right? There's a proportionality test here that kind of has to be met as well. You don't have your own adequate public facilities requirements. The county has theirs. The state does not have adequate public facilities requirements. They do have a process for assessing traffic impact and granting access to their roads. Those 3 things, I would say broadly align, but you don't have the specific tool in your code to get your pieces where you want them to be. I'm not talking about money here. I'm not talking about dinging a developer for doing X. I'm just talking about finding an orderly way to manage growth so that everybody's paying a fair share towards the improvements that need to be done. Right. And my experience now in 15 or so years of dealing with developers and these things, they want certainty of process. Certainly they don't want to pay any more money, right? But probably more importantly, they want certainty of process. And so, having to negotiate to do a traffic impact study for every 20, 40, 60, 80 units development is, multi-phase, is, adds lots of uncertainty to the process. And so having a more orderly process is certainly what I have found, I think most of us would agree, that developers are, I'm looking for. So certainly a process, proportionality, how you interface on a legal basis with the state and the county and the developer, speaks to a need for some type of a adequate public facilities approach. And so, again, I want to be really cautious and say it just so happens to be the example in front of us. But if we were having this conversation 10 years ago about Agricopia and Kings Grant and, Pine Ridge and others in that kind of northwest quadrant, I would have been telling you the same things back then, just kind of where we are today. So the Montero property, Southtown Center, Stagecoach, Steeplechase, all told, including those units already been built, about 1,520 units thought of over, whatever time they're going to be built out. Now, again, first phase of Steeplechase probably worked just fine from a traffic objective. Second phase probably works just fine. Third phase, as an independent matter, probably works just fine. There are safety issues, operational issues. From a capacity perspective, that one phase, kind of neither here nor there. Right? It's when you start to add up everything, and then you add in Stagecoach and the 500 some odd units they're proposing. And all of those would dump out onto Old Stagecoach and then onto 301 to go north or south. And then Montero and Southtown Center don't really have any northbound access to 301. So now they come down and make a U-turn. Well, U-turns on a 6-lane highway are not, ideal from a speed, safety, gap management perspective. So, this kind of dealing with the cumulative impacts, the phasing, is difficult to do unless you have some type of adequate public facility source. I know that there's been some discussion among the commission, the council, and staff about moving something forward. I would strongly encourage you to be doing so sooner rather than later. And again, it's not about dinging developers to do more. It's more about having an orderly process so it's clear about what they have to do. And then kind of as we look specifically at the Southwest and these developments, you've got 4 projects that are active at some level that have some interparcel connectivity, but they don't really flow from a plan. So in the comprehensive plan, there is a Whalewood Parkway South, I believe, so running from Port Tobacco Road down to Old Stagecoach, which I think in concept is kind of there between Steeplechase and Stagecoach, but how that gets built for those properties, depending on the timing of Steeplechase, depending on the timing of Montero and Southtown Center, then you've got a gap in property to the north, there needs to be an alignment that is developed that people can kind of work through as more things occur over time. That I think about Prince Frederick, for example, and the Loop Road, if you're familiar, on the west side of Maryland 2-4. Right? They have, over the course of time, as developments have occurred, created a loop road that is for local access, so people didn't have to fight their way along Maryland 2-4. Effectively have that on the east side of 301 with Washington Avenue, or farther out on the 48th Radio Station Road. You have nothing like that on the west side of 301. And it's as you certainly heard in your deliberations on projects in the last several weeks, it's causing lots of consternation, but it is an appropriate technical issue to be raised at this point. So what we have proposed to staff at this point is to do a access management study for the Southwest quadrant that really looks at all 4 developments that are currently in play, aggregate their and better understand how their impacts were calculated, making sure their assumptions all line up. I think generally probably they do. They were all done by the developers a common traffic consultant among the, 4 developers there. The assumption that we lined up so we can figure out what the ultimate impacts and mitigations are. So that's our recommendation on the Southwest. But it really speaks to a larger need, like how do you implement that? Right? So what is your APF tool to implement something like that?
Jenny?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Gann. So it sounds like this is hindsight is 2020. I mean, and define you don't excuse me, an access management setting. Define that, but you're making recommendations. You're saying, you know, phase one of steeplechase, no impact. Phase 2, no impact. Now we're in phase 3. Stagecoach hasn't started construction or anything. And South Town Center, we don't know when or if they're gonna do anything. So at what point should we have been thinking about phase 3 of steeplechase prior to hindsight being 2020? I'm not clear on that. And access management study, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Sure. Let me answer the first one. When should you have been looking at this? Yesterday and today. Meaning it would have been good to have had these tools more firmly in place. The town has generally relied upon the tools that exist. Excuse me. Apologies. Town has generally relied on the tools that exist in the county's APFO, Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, or the goodwill of relationship with SHA to kind of guide things in the right direction. What happens, and it happens in Baltimore County and Cecil County and everywhere else, is developers find ways to triangulate the process. Well, SHA doesn't require me to do a signal, or I don't meet county's thresholds, or, but that doesn't solve problems. And so my message is, like, let's sit down and let's figure out what the problem is, and then we can figure out what the path forward is. Right? So ideally, you would have had this, 10, 20 years ago, but here we are. Right? You still have enough development in the pipeline over the next 20 years, 30 years, that it would behoove you to have that public facility work. That's the first part. What is an access management study? Basically, the concept is that not every development needs to dump out onto the major arterial. There ought to be secondary arterials and ways around minor collectors that lead to major collectors that lead to, without getting too technical. There ought to be roads need to respect their access points to roads need to be related to the roadway's intended purpose. Brittle one was intended as a highway. You don't want a stoplight every, 500 feet. You don't want an entrance every 500 feet. You don't want a crossover from southbound to northbound every 500 feet. For safety reasons, for operational reasons, etc. So in an area like this, where you have multiple projects going on at the same time, what is the common approach to solving some of these safety, capacity, and operational issues? That's really what an access study looks at. We have several concepts and ideas in our mind today that we'll go into, but it's really about how do you maintain the integrity of the road network that exists for a certain purpose? Is the short answer.
So, Chairman Gann, I have one more question. So when you look at steeplechase, there are so many constraints to that piece of property. There's only so far you can go. So when you look at an access management study, everything that has been thought of, and there has been thought to this, but, I walked with Director Stahl last Friday. It didn't start out as a residential area. It started out as something else. And so with that thought in place, everything that's being proposed is not ideal in the resident's mind. So the access management study, what is it going to tell us that based upon that property, we're not already aware of?
I think I'm trying to be careful not to presuppose solutions. Probably the most aggressive solution, and I realize there are environmental constraints and property ownership constraints, would be a loop road, what was at one point called Quailwood Parkway South, that runs from Maryland 6 to, from Port Tobacco to Maryland 6 down to Old Stagecoach. Does that right of way exist today? Not really. Does it probably need to exist? Yeah. Have certain developments already kind of cast some of their die? Yes. Can it be corrected? Yes. So I think kind of figuring out what those, they're signal, so there's already been general agreement, there already be a signal at Stagecoach and Old Stagecoach and 301, fine. But frankly, until Stagecoach gets developed, but for kind of action of the county or the state, there's nobody to pay for that. Until that Stagecoach gets developed, there's no secondary road there. There are, I mean, again, if you look at the best example I look at is Prince Rest. It was the county, after years of debate and discussion with the state, that said, okay, we just need to build the road. Right? And developers will figure out, kind of how you pay your fair share later, or frankly, don't pay your fair share at all, just because of the way that kind of the timing of development occurs. Sometimes they donated land, sometimes they built, a certain section to a certain base. Sometimes the development just occurred. Because that's the way the lead moves.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mudd and Mr. Yeckley have requested the floor.
Commissioner Mudd?
Thank you. I'd like to ask our rep, for me, one of the single biggest problems we're confronted with is a singular access, which, as things will progress, could support up to 1,100 residents, residential homes, and that would be Steeplechase and a good portion of Stagecoach. The assumption is, and everybody seems correct, that the ultimate connection of Stagecoach to Old Stagecoach Road could be many years away. So that's my bigger concern. And the question is, based on your knowledge of other jurisdictions, my guess is most jurisdictions have subdivision regulations that require a second form of access after potentially 1,000 trips is generated. And the town is confronting this issue directly here with this project. There are future annexations on the board to be considered that are also potentially going to connect 1,500 units to a singular point of access. And I think from a public safety standpoint, that's a real problem that has existed and will continue to exist until the town can enact new regulations that require a second point of access to be included in the design plan. So that's really the question. And that's really my bigger concern with the various projects we're grappling with, which is a single point of access for that number of units is unfathomable. It's a clear safety issue, and be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that issue.
I think the question of a single point of access it needs to be followed by a single point of access to what? In state highway land and in most states on state roads, you are entitled to a single point of access. And the bar for getting a second point of access is pretty high. Because both policy and technical thinking is that there ought to be access points via secondary roads. And so you build a network, a grid network of streets. Right? Obviously, phasing, staging, timing, willingness to contribute and participate is the million dollar question. Right? But it typically starts with a town or a county laying out a master planned roadway to some extent that then is honored by, future developers. And I might add, as the Northwest Quadrant, as I think you indicated, probably has the same issue at some point, right? When you think about anything that happened north of Port Tobacco Road, And that's why you have Quailwood Parkway North and Quailwood Parkway South in your master plan. But those are literally just, crayon lines on the map. They need to be thought through, jointly with the development community and others, property owners to think about how those play out over time.
Kelly, did you say there was someone besides Commissioner Mudd
Ben.
wanted to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Yeckley would like to speak.
Mr. Yackley, you have the floor.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Yackley, and I am the Adequate Public Facilities Planner for the Charles County.
Can't hear you, Mr. Yackley.
Speak up there, man.
I'm not sure why. Is this
Oh,
any
there we
better?
go.
It's just
Okay.
you're a soft-spoken man.
I am. Sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ben Yeckley, and I'm the Adequate Public Facilities Planner for Charles County. I was just here, to offer any kind of help as you all draft your Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance. I'm more than willing to help in any way, shape, or form that I can. And I'm also available if anyone has any questions about our processes in terms of adequate public facilities, about traffic studies, how they're required, not required, how mitigation is required, anything like that. I'm more than willing to explain anything or anything that you guys have questions about, but just wanted to let you know that I'm here and listening.
Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Sampson.
Yes. After listening to everything and looking at the last few projects that the planning commission has reviewed, one thing that's come to my mind that I would like your feedback on is the immediate concern, the near-term concern versus the future concerns. And what I mean specifically by this, all the projects in question were done, and I'll use the term, no pun intended, without a comprehensive plan. Meaning there was no overlay of the various projects to see how traffic, transportation, cost, safety would impact or fit together the town as a whole. And that's obvious because the work on 6 will impact 301, which will impact subdivisions south of 301, which will, not now, but in 2 or 3 years from now, have a second and third order effect of changing our zoning designations, which is what I care about. It'll also present the problem to the council of generating more revenue, more construction, because you'll have to put more mitigating measures in as everything from accidents, traffic incidents go up. So my first question is, what are the mitigating factors without penalizing developers that we've already approved and told them this was good to go? Do you have any recommendations on that in the immediate term?
Conscious that we're in a work session and not a council meeting. Commission meeting. Unfortunately, the near-term solutions are probably worse for the public at large than we would like them to be. I would not be excited, for example, about a second or third exit point 1 to 301 for safety reasons. That, to me, that's not a great short-term solution. That said, neither is doing nothing. Right? So, that's when you kick into your long-term thinking and you just have to kind of maybe grin and bear it for a few years. Maybe there is a way to, structure, I'll be very careful how I say this. I think there's ways to structure the phasing of development where the town can use its authorities, either existing or to be had, in order to get to longer term solutions, like right-of-way dedication, subdivision regulation adjustments, and adequate public facilities, overlay, an adequate public facilities ordinance, a special tax district, or assessment. There's lots of ways to get there. The short-term solutions are not great, but property owners have rights, right? And the situation is what it is. So I do have specific technical suggestions. And you'll get into this back and forth about, well, why should I have to pay for this and why should I have to pay for that? To me, that's not the issue, right? And the cost of a track, if I were moving forward, right, and I had to make an immediate decision on some of these in the Southwest, I would be pushing for a signal at Glen Albany / Old Stagecoach. Because it will give you some gaps in traffic. Okay? Right now, if people turn out of Steeplechase, they gotta go, what, 500 feet, make a quick U-turn and head north and hope that all goes well, right? And it happens today, and it, you know, the crash volume is not high, but every car you add increases the risk. Okay? So maybe the short-term answer actually is to get that signal that is otherwise required by the steeple, well, I shouldn't say required, that was otherwise contemplated in the Stagecoach development built earlier, right? So that you create those gaps in traffic. Again, the piecemeal way in which developments come in and mitigation, you know, is apportioned out, you know, is unfortunate. There are places that have found solutions to it. It requires a variety of policy compromises. And I think I'd probably be better serving you when we talk it through with in more detail through an accident management study than opining on specific technical solutions.
Okay, and just two more quick things. Am I correct that the current development, not any one in particular, but once built out to completion, and then coupled with the growth of the town and the adjoining areas, will generate or will cause us to have to relook our zoning, meaning it will impact the zoning designations, you know, 2 or 3 years. And it will also generate expenditures, whether we want them or not, for safety mitigation. Would that be a fair assumption, or is that an unfair assumption?
Maybe both.
I'm asking, you can explain. I'm just trying to
So
get a better understanding.
who bears what cost and when, right? At the end of the day, it's a state roadway, right? And so, you know, anything that happens post access granting is on them to do something. Which is what role do you as a town or the county in the case of Stagecoach? What actions do you take up front to mitigate some of that? So, you know, to whom does it generate expenditures? I can name 4 different words. Could be the town, could be the county, could be the state, could be the developer.
And I just have one
That's the
last.
best answer. That's the best answer I think to give.
Sampson had one more question, then
I
Councilman.
think Director Harrington's gonna address, but she's had her hand raised for a little while, so, just be aware.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I just had one last question. I'm not sure, I mean, I know it's done in the traffic mitigation studies, but I'll just give you an instance for context. I was going home, I turned into the development in which I lived. There were some maintenance trucks out there. They were just doing their job. I couldn't get around and couldn't get in. Okay. So that made me think, if there's an accident, something happens, that kind of thing. And I'll just use where I live at, Steeplechase. Accident happens or something goes wrong right outside, right where 301 connects. Who's actually liable for that? Is that the town, the state, or the developer? I'm just trying to figure out who.
The short answer is whoever courts decide. And I'm not trying to be flippant.
Yeah.
And that's the best answer I think, you know, is fair to give. Liable, first of all, liable for what? Right? And the second is, you know, who are the parties involved? I think we're all kind of, from a policy perspective, we're all a little bit liable for not having the tool in place to make sure that doesn't happen. From a legal perspective, I'll yield to Mr. Mann.
Director Harrington, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that I reiterate that the adequate public facilities ordinance is basically the key that we are missing right now. It has been moved to the top of my priority list. I will be teleworking this week. And that will be one of the first things that I start getting back to. I know that the town attorney is heavily involved with the adequate public facilities ordinance, but I'll also be working with Jamie on this in the initial reviews. And as Mr. Yeckley pointed out, we have been in close communication, getting their updates that they're currently working on with their adequate public facilities ordinance at the county. And then it's going to take a lot of coordination and discussion, as was already mentioned, with State Highway Administration. That is their right of way. And any work that's done on 301 needs to go through them. So it's going to be a lot of communication. We're going to have to work with the developers and work with the stakeholders in the area to try to move things forward and to improve the safety along that corridor. But I think that getting that adequate public facilities ordinance in place is going to be a big difference when we're looking at our reviews. And ensuring that traffic impact studies are being required, that certain levels of service are being met, that certain warrants are being covered, so we can make sure that any improvements needed along the right-of-ways are incorporated into the development. So yes, it is going to be difficult. And as Jamie said, I'm hoping that the developers understand the situation and are willing to work with us in the meantime. But I will note that the adequate public facilities ordinance draft has been completed. I need to add in the school seat allocation policy. And then I'm going to get that back to the town attorney and town manager for the initial discussion. And then hopefully move that forward with review at the planning commission level and getting public comment and public input as soon as possible. So I do want you to know that I am actively working on that, and I'm trying to move that forward as quickly as possible, because until we get that in place, we are kind of at the mercy of just trying to piecemeal different projects and looking at mitigation from a wide perspective.
Yeah, I would say my experience is developers will rumble, but at the end of the day, what they want is certainty of process. The issue you had a few weeks ago about steeplechase, not to get too much, there was no requirement they submit a traffic impact study at that point. They did it at goodwill. It kind of got, its own life to it. Does an appropriate time to get into that stuff. There was staff language that was proposed to try and give a little teeth to it. Understand why, to the conversations, understand why the council didn't add that language from a process standpoint. But I think Jane's right. I think the development communities need to understand that they've got to work together both among themselves and with the town and county to figure something out. Just kind of everybody saying, well, look, my traffic studies always say in Harrison Keeler terms that all the women are beautiful, all the children are strong, and things like that. And all the traffic signals operate at level service A. Right? That's what every traffic study I've worked on in every jurisdiction basically comes to that same conclusion. And there is some truth to that when you start considering things in very small units.
So you're saying that traffic impact studies are not reliable?
I think that would be a word for it, yes.
Okay, so I'm hearing from Director
Well,
Harrington.
let me clarify that. Speaking from firms done many of them, I think people who write traffic impact studies have a client to be served. First and foremost, I think traffic impact studies give you the statement is all models are wrong, some are useful. Right? There's a context to those studies, and I think the biggest problem youth all face in that regard is you don't really have a tool to use those traffic impact studies. So somebody could write you the best report ever. Right? Very much we do.
Okay, so I'm hearing from Director Harrington that top of our list is the adequate public facilities. Yeah, that sounds good, worthy cause. So, Mr. Kendricks, you've also mentioned you're recommending this access management study for the Southwest Quadrant. Is that over and beyond this adequate public facilities?
I think they are done in coordination. So in other jurisdictions, what they will do is they will do a sub-area plan. Let's say you want to take the route of not requiring individual developers to have individual mitigation elements, but this is the project cost, the total project cost. This is your fair share, this is your fair, this is our fair share, the state's fair share. And if you need a way to allocate, those costs. So I think coming up with the plan and having a subdivision and APF regulations to deal with them are to some extent two different things.
Okay, so
But given the urgency of where we are and the pace of development projects coming through this body, I think it would behoove you to have both go along together.
Okay, so that's a good segue, really. Mr. Yeckley has already offered the county to be involved with us on such a study. Would the state also be involved?
I think it's gotta be my recommendation would be that it is the state, the county, the town, and the property owners sitting down and figuring this out. There's some basic additional technical analysis that needs to occur. Each of you has different authorities. You all have land use authority. If your comp plans or your subdivision regs say one access point, right, to, road X, then it's one access point to road X. Right? That's what in Calvert County along 2-4, that became the rule at a certain point. Now, the county chose not to enforce it at a certain point where State Highway decided to usurp their authority, and grant it, notwithstanding that local regulations that would want politics do it as well. But right now you don't have a tool.
You had more to your presentation. Go ahead.
Property owner could be either, the person who owns the property at this time, or it could be the contract purchaser of the property.
When I say that, I mean, because when you say property owner, residents can think they're property owners.
Yeah.
So
I think existing residents are absolutely a stakeholder in that process.
That's why we invite on the public hearings.
But at the end of the day, I philosophically believe that's called the public right of way for a reason. And that's because it's the public's to decide and control. That public is authority vested in you, right? So everybody's voice gets heard, for better or worse, and then you decide. But at the end of the day, the public right of way is not to serve a private individual purpose. Right?
So you still had a couple more
Do I?
major things to cover, Pine Ridge
I don't.
traffic?
No, I just, this actually been supplemental material.
Oh, okay.
And I think we wanted to talk about Pine Ridge, we could, but I think that's probably for another day.
Pine Grove, Pine Grove.
Pine Grove, sorry. Eric, Pine Ridge, yes, whatever we are. Pine Grove. One more oaks and myrtles.
So one of the big things that I kept hearing this, and I guess I would say this out loud as the chair of the commission and say it to the council. There needs to be active involvement between the town, the county, and the state on a regular basis. And then you've added property owners later once we get into these access studies. So I don't know if that's already happening, but I would make that recommendation to make it happen.
So Director Harrington said that was already an ongoing thing.
Not to speak for Director Harrington, sorry to hear. I think what I would say is it is ongoing on an ad hoc basis. Like when we need to figure something out, we all get on the phone and figure it out. But in doing so, right, we find this triangulation issue where, a developer will run to the state and say, hey, can I get this? And then the developer will turn back and say, well, the state said I could, right? At which point it's not too late for you to do anything. The county says, hold on a second, right? So it's a little bit ad hoc in the way it occurs, and that's just a function of not really having the tools to do anything else.
Again, Councilman Jenkins, Ward 4, I would concur with your recommendation to have regularly scheduled with the state highway and the county. in a galaxy long ago, I did work on the planning side in the public sector, and admittedly, state highway can be difficult, but that's just what it is. But I've also learned that if you don't engage with them,
Right.
you don't raise your hand, you don't talk to them, they will not pay attention to you. So I would urge us to make it professional, but that we have a not daily, but we have a strong dialogue with the state, because we have a lot at stake here right now. And I would just go back to what the planning ordinance says in the very, very beginning, 191, with the purpose of the zoning ordinance is the health, safety, and welfare. And to me, that drives everything. So I would just concur with your recommendation
So
as one council member.
So if the recommendation were to be picked up, and I would think it'd be the council would drive this, it would require commitment of, I guess, an individual or a committee or something to make sure that there's this regular communication
The town manager.
with the town manager.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Anybody else have other questions, comments to bring up? Anybody online have any questions or comments to bring up? Well, Mr. Kendricks, thank you very much for a very detailed presentation. Thank you. Hope your drive home is better than it was. Yeah.
But I am flying to Sunny San Diego at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, so that will be better.
Okay,
Straight to the earth.
this is a joint meeting, so I would ask the council if there's any other items that the council feels need to be brought up at this meeting.
Seeing what the hour is, I will refrain from
Okay.
adding anything else.
So then I'll ask the commissioner, anything else to be brought up for the good of this meeting? Hearing none, and with no objection, I call for adjournment at 7:51. Thank you all very much for.
And thank you for all online too, especially the county. Really appreciate your interaction.